Our presentation is on the movie Hidden Figures. Hidden Figures was directed by Theodore Melfi, produced by Donna Gigliotti, and written by Margaret Lee Shetler. The plot of the movie goes over 3 African American women who work at NASA on the insurmountable task of getting an astronaut into orbit. They achieve this amazing feat by inventing the equations and engineering solutions to solve this problem. My ultimate question is what motivates the main characters. In my personal opinion, what motivates the main characters is that they are trying to prove their value in their field of study. Catherine solved the incredibly difficult math to understand and figure out all of the orbital mechanics. Mary was an engineer who solved problems dealing with the re-entry up to the capsule, and Dorothy was able to read and understand how this big IBM computation device was to solve all the math required for these orbital calculations. All 3 achieved some of the hardest problems of their time during a time where sex and race were discriminated against. One of the Schultz speaker concepts that I chose was ethos. Ethos is an ethical appeal to your sense of right and wrong. In the movie, there's a scene where Catherine Jones has been ousted by her boss about her taking extremely long breaks, and she gets into an argument with him about how he is calling her out for doing this, but then she has to explain to him how there are no colored bathrooms on this side of the campus, and that she has to walk 45 minutes to get to a bathroom and then come back. The other Schultz concept I chose was integrity, which is the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles. The boss is a good representation of this due to the fact that he, after being called out, actually goes around to all the bathrooms and just rips off the sign saying whites only or colored only. The other Schultz concept I went over was neighborly love. One of the great examples in the movie of neighborly love is that Dorothy gives positions to the women who were rude to her, which is a little strange because of the fact that the main woman who was rude to her, was actually in a superior position than her and has now come to her for help. The movie review I chose is by Nathan Matisse, and it reads as, Hidden Figures puts the familiar period piece lens on an overlooked part of space history without glossing over the ugly bits, while still feeling hopeful for what science and technology can achieve when the biggest and brightest can participate. I am in 100% agreement with this review. So much of the movie's story is delivered through the visuals. For example, in the scene where one of the main characters goes to grab a cup of coffee and everyone looks around at her, and is confused as to why she touched the coffee mug, as she was a lower class citizen. Another good example is when she's trying to find the bathroom. These scenes do a wonderful job showing visually the stigmatism at the time. My recommendation is that everyone should watch this movie, not only for the fact that it shows how in that time period there were a lot of different discrimination towards not only a race but also sex. Many people didn't believe that these people could actually achieve what they did, but not only did they achieve something that everyone else thought was impossible, they went far beyond and did something way beyond the expectation. They were insurmountable or indispensable in the achievement that is getting a man to the moon. All right, I'm going to hand it off to Melissa now.
Surround yourself with people who are masters, not mediocre. Whatever group you are in the middle of will determine who you will become. In the movie Hidden Figures, the main characters focus on preparation, not promotion. Every woman needs to see Hidden Figures. Hidden Figures is an incredible story of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority members Katherine Johnson, Dorothy Vaughan, and Mary Jackson. These three women were brilliant African American women working at NASA who served as the brains behind the launch of astronaut John Glenn into orbit. It's all about fighting the odds and achieving your dreams. These kinds of stories must be told. Without diversity, there is no strength. Without representation, there is no idea that strength can exist. My review is by Richard Brody, titled Hidden Figures is a subtle and powerful work of counter history. Richard Brody's review was about the importance of Black women in the 60s when they were discriminated against. These women set a precedent on how, even in times of white supremacy, they could overcome and make a mark by bringing their intelligence to NASA, where they achieved bringing a man to the moon and back against all odds. My Schultz speaker concepts are speak up for others. We can change the world when we stick together. It wasn't because of Catherine, Mary, or Dorothy. It was because they stuck together, leaning on each other, loving, caring, and supporting each other. They succeeded because they encouraged each other. When we speak up in our actions, it's how we treat each other regardless of pain. Anticipate challenges and opportunities. The main challenges in the movie are discrimination and segregation. The characters in the movie are underestimated and treated poorly, struggling to be seen beyond race and gender. These three women's responses to challenges were withdrawal, resigned acceptance, and verbal confrontation. All these women verbally confronted their challenges by getting back their rights and becoming equal to other white people and men in the workplace. Fruits of Spirit. Dorothy, Mary, and Catherine walked with kindness, joy, and peace. They bore the fruit of the Holy Spirit in their actions and in the way they held their heads in times of utter dismay. They were a positive example of who women are and how women, even Black women, can be something great. All three women never lost sight of their purpose or the value of who they are as God's children. We all go through storms, but it's in the storms that we bear fruit. My questions are, has discrimination ever prevented you from doing something you wanted or were able to do? In the movie Hidden Figures, two types of discrimination happen, race and gender. In the film, Dorothy was discriminated against for her race, so she could not become supervisor. Mary was discriminated against for her race, so she could not become engineer, and Catherine was discriminated for her race, which made people think that she wasn't as smart as them and that she didn't deserve a place in the highest department of NASA. I learned from the film that these three women responded against it and sought fairness and equality. My second question is, has anyone ever looked up to you and wanted to follow in your footsteps? I work with kids and I find it very enduring to teach them something that I'm passionate about, much like the three leading women in the movie Hidden Figures. These women made an historical impact on the nation, leading the groundwork for putting a man on the moon. It's a very huge accomplishment with all the trials and tribulations. They allow their intelligence and endurance to forge to become women who will forever lead the way for other women. Throughout life, we will come upon things that prevent us from something we are more than qualified for, hurdles and hoops we jump through. Isn't this life, though, going through the valleys to be on the mountaintop? Enduring the valleys towards the mountaintop allows us to be much more grateful, because it's in those valleys that our characters develop so that when we are on that mountaintop, we can lead others by example. True and consistent confidence stems from two places: us being completely aware of our position in God and our preparedness. When those two are established, you're not afraid of anything or anyone, and no big moment is too big. Thanks. Catherine's up next. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Melissa. And finally, I'll be presenting the third part of our group's Hidden Figures speech and analysis. First off, I'd like to start with my movie review from Brian Schlatt, who answered on ChristianAnswers.net. His review primarily praised the three elements of the movie and how well they blended together. The three elements being discrimination, science and history, and theatrical elements in the movie. The movie was really fun to watch in its theatrical elements, but the theatrical element did not overshine the history or the science of the movie, and did not overwhelm the idea that they wanted to show with discrimination being a major part of the lives of the main characters. Overall, Brian Schlatt rated this movie a 4 out of 5, and while I agree with his review and the fact that the elements were very well balanced, I disagree with the number review, and I would rate it a 4.5 out of 5 for its showmanship, as well as the schmaltzy servant speaking concepts that it portrays. Of these three, I'm going to be focusing on speaking precisely, speaking courageously, and advocating for all neighbors, which are primarily found in the three female main characters and one of the main characters' bosses. The first main character, Catherine, often speaks very precisely, especially when she needs to complete information for her job or when she needs information or anything else for another reason. Mary, however, another one of the main characters, tends to use precise speaking when she wants something rather than needs something. She'll use precise speaking to emphasize a point she's trying to make or to emphasize where there's a problem. For example, when asking whether or not she'd like to be an engineer, she emphasizes through precise speaking that if she were a white male, she'd already be an engineer rather than having to wish to be one. If she had used flowery and flowy language instead to describe this and her feelings, it likely would not have had made the same impact as if she had used this precise language. Finally, Catherine's boss also uses precise language throughout the entire movie as he attempts to motivate his employees to complete NASA's goals. And although the language is often very lengthy and descriptive, he does not mince his words and uses properly descriptive words within the time frame that he has to make the biggest impact on his employees. The second concept I'm going to be covering is speaking courageously, which we can see in all three of the main characters. Catherine, we can see throughout the movie, often has to muster up the courage to speak up for herself. And as the movie goes along, we can see that she gathers more courage and more times to speak up to herself throughout the movie. And it's a very interesting character development to see as she grows in this concept of schmaltzy servant speaking. Mary, in addition, also speaks very courageously, and she even goes to court to advocate for herself, with something very courageous considering there has never been another woman in her situation who actually ended up getting to where she wanted to be. Finally, the last main character, Dorothy, tends to speak very courageously, but one example that I personally found very convincing and interesting was when she's explaining to her sons why she stole a library book. Her sons were adamant that the action was wrong, but she was adamant that she did it for the right reasons, and therefore it is right. And her courageous speaking and parenting her child, especially on a train full of strangers who were within earshot of why stealing a library book is okay, is very courageous speaking. The final concept I'm going to be covering is advocating for all neighbors. And this is a great one, especially for Dorothy in the movie. Dorothy is the head of the computing group, although not officially, in the movie. And when she doesn't officially get the supervisor position with more pay and a bigger title, but Catherine still gets a job that she has been hoping for, Dorothy concedes and celebrates with Catherine and says advancement for any of us is advancement for all, which is advocating for her neighbors. Dorothy also, when later offered this same supervisor position, states that she will not accept it unless she can bring her entire group of girls with her, who were going to be out of a job if they did not come with her. Her advocating for her girls in this matter was really a demonstration of servant speaking. Finally, all three women chose this concept of servant speaking when speaking with John Glenn as the representative of their commuting group. Although he only spoke to the three of them, the girls mentioned the entire commuting group would be with him. And with John Glenn and his spaceflight and doing his calculations, and never once did they let their compliments directly to them only stay with them. They always referenced back to the group. Finally, I'd like to discuss whether or not faith is supported or present, or neither in this movie, and I'd like to argue that it is both. Faith is present in quite a bit of times in the movie as the main characters attend their Baptist church and thank God for many successes throughout the movie, especially when facing discrimination. Catherine especially is very much seen praying and thanking God for her successes throughout the movie, and at the climax of the movie, she's seen silently praying and asking God for help when John Glenn can no longer be reached in his descent back to Earth. And now all of these are all very good points for Faith being present in the movie, but Faith is also very supported in the movie. Throughout mentions for all of these 3 points that I just made, not one of the characters are criticized for being Christian. In fact, it's very much supported and emphasized to be a good thing in the movie, which is a major support for the Christian faith. Finally, the characters are also very virtuous and very honest, with many of them doing the right thing whenever they can as they're fighting their discrimination, which is very unfair towards them. And this can be mainly attributed and hinted at in the film because they are Christian and because they're trying to do something right. Therefore, I'd argue Faith is very much present and supported, not just present and not supported in the film, unlike it being in other films. Thank you very much for listening to my group's presentation on Hidden Figures.